Now that Union Cross is finished, all eyes should be turning towards Dark Road, the sort of sequel to this Age of Fairy Tales storyline. Whilst there are a number of things I could discuss about what may potentially come up or happen in that game, I want to focus once again on the role of darkness, especially since it seems very apparent it will play a significant role in Dark Road. In terms of what role it will play, well, I believe that role will be very closely linked with the fate of Xehanort's 4 classmates, but maybe also the bequeathing of the no-name Keyblade. If the title of this game wasn't enough to give away the fact that darkness will be a big focus, then perhaps its protagonist being the primary antagonist of the previous saga would get the point across. We are basically following Xehanort through what is essentially a villain origin story, and when it comes to antagonists and villains, it's quite typical for them to have a tragic backstory, a sort of tormented past that shaped them into the deadly dark antagonist that threatens our protagonist. A villain origin story's purpose is to show us not only how that happened, but usually to allow us as the audience to relate to them and consequently sympathize with them more than we may have prior. Now the reason why I mentioned this is because, as I said, these stories usually have some sort of key tragic event that acts as the turning point for the character that leads to villainy. In the case of Dark Road, what would be a real good way of creating some tragedy? Well, the death of Xehanort's classmates, of course, but even more tragic, their death by his hands. Now we already know from the first episode of Dark Road that something tragic is certainly going to happen, as there are 4 graves marked by flowers, and we can clearly see that Xehanort has 4 classmates. So ever since we saw that scene, it was a natural conclusion to assume that all 4 would perish, especially since to our knowledge none of them appear later in the timeline, and of course in this specific scene they're not present, whereas Ericus and Xehanort are. And given the fact that Xehanort is the one kneeling by their graves and putting a flower down and looking quite solemn, it seems fair to assume it's the graves of his classmates. But none of that explains why I'm suggesting that they might be struck down by Xehanort himself. Well, there's a number of reasons. Besides the simple fact that Xehanort is going to become the sort of person who clearly has no issue striking down others, and the fact that he has to do something in the course of this story to show us why he becomes the villain, there's also the new information we have now from the Union Cross ending. We have 4 graves, 4 classmates, and 4 darknesses. We now know that the Master of Masters planned for all 13 darknesses to be placed in specific places so they could later be defeated. The 7 deadly darknesses are meant to take root in the foretellers, whilst 5 of them were meant to join with the Union leaders, leaving the last one trapped. But we know now that thanks to the player, things didn't go that way exactly, and instead 4 darknesses were trapped in the portal cable, 1 joined with Ventus, likely the being that becomes Vanitas and or perhaps the Dark Inferno, and the last one was seen with Luciu, and it's unclear what happened with it, but it's those 4 that were trapped by the player that I want to focus on. We know that the player sacrificed themselves to seal the darkness away in this cable, and we also know that they passed on, choosing to begin a new journey, and that journey is of course what we will experience in Dark Road and beyond with Xehanort. But we also know that Xehanort has memories of that previous journey of another life, and it is those exact memories of the player that fosters his desire to seek out unknown worlds. But as I've discussed before, these memories seem quite intimate and personal, and now we know why. At the start of Dark Road, when Xehanort describes these dreams, he says that if he gets to the outside world, maybe he'd be able to meet his friends from those dreams. So perhaps this desire to meet his old friends will eventually lead to him looking into Daybreak Town. I've mentioned before how I think his memories of the past might potentially play into how he discovers unreality and ancient technology like the Arcs, or it could be the Master himself that tells him about it. But either way, I would assume Dark Road will be where we find out why and what he knows about these things. But if these memories do lead to him looking into Daybreak Town, or him accidentally discovering it, I have a feeling that might be how he will discover the 4 darknesses trapped in the Data World. And remember, Scala ad Caelum is built upon the ruins of Daybreak Town, but the Data Daybreak Town was where the darknesses were sealed, and that world was put into sleep mode. So who knows? Xehanort might just end up awakening it. Maybe not. But basically my thoughts are that somehow, whether through Xehanort or some other means, the 4 darknesses will be freed and eventually take root in the hearts of Xehanort's 4 classmates, making them vessels of darkness. leading to him eventually having to bring them down. And because Xehanort has memories of the player's life, it's possible he will also have memories about them sealing the darkness away, and Xehanort has clearly shown already that he has a strong interest in darkness, and we all know that he will eventually become a Keyblade wielder that stands on the side of the darkness, controlling it to his own ends rather than being controlled by it. So perhaps he will intentionally free these darknesses somehow to test some sort of idea he has about how darkness works, and this may end up backfiring. If however this isn't the case, I still think it's possible that Xehanort's memories of the past will play into him looking into certain things, and perhaps that's how he meets the Master. Maybe he'll tell the Master about these dreams that he's been having, and the Master will put 2 and 2 together, which would be a really cool thing to see, I'm sure. I mean, at the very least, we know he's going to meet the Master, and based on their conversation in Remind, it's clear they've met before, and I would think that meeting will happen in Dark Road, either before or shortly after Xehanort begins his Mark of Mastery exam. Now, that was where my mind was at when I first thought about Dark Road after seeing the Union Cross ending, but when I actually went to have a look through it, I started seeing a number of things I'd never paid attention to before that only made me further convinced that something along these lines will end up being the case. The line that stood out to me this time when I looked at the graveyard scene was when Ericus says to Xehanort that what happened wasn't his fault. There's no voice lines to convey the mood here, but something about Xehanort's expression and the rain, it just all gives a somber tone and a strong sense of guilt. I mean, having to take out his classmates because they fell to the darkness seems like something Xehanort might feel quite guilty about, especially if it's something he feels responsible for. At the start of the second episode, Xehanort says change can come from the smallest, simplest thing, from light or darkness. Later in the same episode, Hermod points out that a threat stronger than any Heartless is the darkness inside people's hearts. Then there's the very odd flashback to Union Cross where Brain is saying that darkness can hide anywhere, even inside someone. But the part in this scene that really stood out for me was this part here where Ericus and Xehanort have a talk amongst themselves. And Xehanort asks if darkness can burrow so deep into someone's heart that they don't even know it's there. Ericus says it's a scary thought, and then Xehanort asks Ericus if he could turn his Keyblade on a being that has no idea what they've become, and Ericus answers, I don't know. And Xehanort then drops an eerie yet probably prophetic line that one day they might have to decide. Now, if that's not some heavy foreshadowing, then I don't know what is. It's so heavy in fact that I almost feel like it's too blatant, but in all honesty, it didn't even occur to me in all this time since this episode came out, not until now. Even the way they stood away from the others as though conspiring, and then Ericus lying about what they were speaking about and saying that they'll stay there and let the others all leave, it all just serves to further distance themselves from the classmates. And just look at everything we know about Xehanort and Ericus and their time in Scala. Everything's about those two as friends. It's never anything to do with their classmates. All of this to me just seems to strongly support the idea that Xehanort and perhaps also Ericus will be forced to have to, as Xehanort says, turn their Keyblades against those that have no idea what they've become. And I would speculate those people would be their classmates. And like I already said, I think this story is a tragedy waiting to happen, and if it was a situation where their classmates became vessels of darkness but had no idea because maybe just like the Queen of Hearts, they believe that what they're doing is correct, then that in itself would be quite tragic. But there's more than just this. At the start of the third episode, Xehanort is walking through some sort of current of darkness. I believe this is a flashback of him walking through the dark corridor that will eventually lead to him ending up in Scala, which is why he says he took the first step of his long journey. Now what I want to focus on is what Xehanort says, but also on the darkness that he's walking through. First, we'll look at his words. Xehanort says that the darkness whispered to him from all around, but he can't understand it, yet it stirred emotions in his heart. The emotions he felt were feelings like hatred, jealousy, doubt, things he says he's never himself felt before, but they belonged to people he had yet to meet, and he wondered if he could handle being the focus of someone else's darkness. Now, given the time he's saying this, his classmates would be the people he had yet to meet. Now, why would his classmates feel hatred, jealousy, or doubt? Well, like I said already, Xehanort and Ericus are clearly distancing themselves from their classmates, and if you look at some of the conversations between them, like when they asked them what they're talking about, or like when Erd asked them why they wanted to stay on their own and insists that they tell her, all of these little things that make them seem like they're conspiring would be the types of things that might create some doubt amongst their classmates, and I'm sure in the future episodes we'll see where the jealousy and hatred may be coming from. Now, I also mentioned about how I want to focus on the darkness itself in this scene. scene. If you look closely, you can see that clouds of darkness pass through Xehanort, and those clouds of darkness look basically identical to the ones from Union Cross, and I count 4 of them. This is the first one, this is the second, this is the third, and this is the fourth. The first 3 all pass through and move on, but the fourth one seems to sort of linger and pester Xehanort for a bit before passing. Now, I could be wrong with this, but because I had this theory already in my head, I was curious if I was to count if the number would turn out to be 4, and it seems like it is 4. And I believe that these darknesses are meant to represent the darkness in the people's hearts that he would soon meet. And again, I believe those people are his 4 classmates, and that would make sense if it is indeed 4 darknesses that are passing through him. You can have a look at the scene for yourself and let me know what you think, but that's what my takeaway from it was. Like I referenced in my previous video, there's also Master Odin's speech about how darkness works that also has hints of foreshadowing of all of this as well. The discussion near the end of episode 3 about the missing upperclassmen and the darkness is quite interesting too, especially when Ericus goes off on Xehanort. Then there's the bolder scene where he worries about his sister and how she'll be lost to darkness. This scene is interesting because it implies there's something off about the Mark of Mastery exam that they've been sent on, and I want to address this to tie it into my final point for this theory. The missing upperclassmen were partaking in their Mark of Mastery exam, which we know is an exam set by a Keyblade master. The only master we've seen so far is Master Odin. What's interesting though is that Xehanort's class is sent to look for the missing upperclassmen instead of people who rank higher than them, and this is clearly a very dangerous mission. If upperclassmen have gone missing and maybe couldn't handle the situation, why would Master Odin think that Xehanort and his class would be able to handle it then? Like Ericus says to Boulder, it sounds like the upperclassmen weren't all expected to make it back from this test. So with all that being said, I'm going to tie this into a theory that's been floating around ever since we saw No Name hanging up in that classroom. Yeah, it's possible that Master Odin is Luciu. Now assuming that's the case, what exactly would be his motive for sending Xehanort's class to look for the missing upperclassmen? Simple, to determine the chosen one, the scapegoat that will wield No Name. Now we know based on the secret reports that Luciu is waiting for that person to appear, and we know that Xehanort will eventually be the one to end up being that chosen person. Luciu did not pass No Name to Brain or any of the other Union leaders, but he will eventually give it to Xehanort, or perhaps Xehanort will get it off of him in some other way. But if he is Master Odin, or really just a master of any sort in Scala, he would be perfectly positioned to use all of this as a way of testing which of these wielders can not only be devoted to darkness, but actually harness and control it so they can fulfill the prophecy. Again, No Name is in the classroom, so how did Master Odin get a hold of it if he isn't Luciu? Because again, Luciu didn't seem willing to pass it to a Union leader like he was supposed to. And how else would Xehanort get it? He's going to become Master Xehanort at some point, and that will be after completing his Mark of Mastery exam. I think receiving No Name from his master as a sort of reward for being able to overcome the darkness would fit very well with what we all know so far. Even if Luciu isn't Master Odin, I wouldn't be surprised if he's not still behind all of this in some way and was just observing from afar. There's other little details I could point out in just these 3 episodes, but let's just say I can see a lot of potential for these classmates to turn against Xehanort and Ericus. I think it wouldn't be too dissimilar to how the foretellers all had feelings of jealousy and doubt amongst themselves, and that led to them also clashing. If things play out in any way similar to what I've suggested here, I think it will do a good job of showing us some of the hard choices that Xehanort would have had to make and give him a motivation for wanting to learn about how to control the darkness, because he would have had to witness the consequences of not being able to control it with his classmates. It might also further demonstrate to us why Ericus hates the darkness so much, and we did see that he was willing to strike down his students, so we know that eventually he will grow into becoming the kind of person that is able to strike down those close to him if he believes that they are afflicted with darkness. There's still more I could say, but I think I've covered the main points and got the idea across. This dark road that Xehanort is taking is certain to be filled with a great amount of tragedy and trauma that will no doubt give rise to the grand antagonist that we've come to know as Master Xehanort. But I could end up being completely wrong on all of this, and it may turn out that this isn't the case at all, but who knows, some of what I'm saying here might be correct, or perhaps it will be completely wrong. But as Xehanort would say, well, it's just a theory. Believe it or not, I still have more thoughts and theories to share, and one of them is going to be about Luciu and these lies that he's been telling us. I also want to thank you guys for getting this channel to over 2,000 subscribers. I really do appreciate all of your comments and your support, and of course I'll do my best to continue putting out enjoyable content. Also, if any of you happen to be Nier fans, be sure to keep an eye out for my very next video. Be sure to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you very much for watching this entire video. My name is NextGenNovelist, and that's all I've got to say, and I'm out. Peace.